God, let the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Caught a Netflix documentary on ZZ Top, little band from Texas. When they first started out, they couldn't get anybody to show up, and then suddenly they started getting airplay, and they were booking every place. They would show up anywhere, any place, anybody who would invite them, and they've landed in a little small club in Alvin, Texas, just when they were first beginning. And they were waiting behind the curtains to begin the show. One of the band members decided they'd take a peek out to see how crowded the room was, opened up the curtains just a little bit, stuck his head out, and there was one single person who showed up for their concert. Smaller venue. They all looked at each other and thought, I guess we'll just try again some other place, some other time. They went down, introduced themselves to the guy who came, and the guy said, I bought my ticket. I came to hear a show. So they got back up on stage, played an hour-and-a-half set. The one individual who came gave him a standing ovation, and then they played an encore after that. The Netflix documentary tells it that from time to time, that one guy will still show up at ZZ Top concerts and remind the band members, I'm the guy that was in Alvin, Texas, by myself watching your show. We all fail. That just sort of happens to all of us, and I think it's been well documented. It's a great book called Break Open the Sky by Steve Ballman. He writes it's just inevitable. In fact, about 75% of venture capital-backed startup businesses fail. 40% of CEOs don't last 18 months. 81% of new hires do not work out. 99% of new patents never earn a single penny. 95% of new products introduced in any given year are going to fail. Long, long time ago, there used to be a popular movie called E.T. Extraterrestrial. Producers found that it was so incredibly popular that Atari stepped in. They wanted to make a video game to capitalize on the popularity of the movie itself. And so they just rushed to production, millions of copies of this video game based on E.T. Problem was, they rushed it out. It was an awful game, poorly designed, wasn't received. Nobody wanted any part of it. Nobody heard anything else after that. And about 10 years ago, they discovered in Alamogordo, New Mexico, a huge dump. And they started to find these cartridges. They had 3 million cartridges they had to get rid of. They put them in a dump just to get rid of them, which happens when we fail. We just want to bury those things. But also what happens is when we fail, those things tend to resurface. It's just inevitable. 88% of New Year's resolutions end in failure. 100% of human bodies will fail. Issue is not if we're going to fail, it's when and how we're going to fail. And the more important question is, how do you really respond to it? Because if you allow God to be able to use the failure, things begin to happen. You get a chance to redefine who you really are. You have also a discovery of resiliency that you didn't know you had, the ability not to give up or to quit. You also have an invitation to reconstruct a new life. There's a book called The Gift of Failure by Jessica Lahey, and it ought to be read by every parent because it talks about generations of parents now that'll do anything and everything to make sure their kid never, ever fails. It means they'll intervene. They'll advocate on behalf of the student to the teacher. They will talk to coaches. They will go out of their way to protect their child ever from the sting and the pain and the hurt of failure. As you can guess, what she says is they are missing this fundamental lesson. We do a great job of teaching our kids how to succeed. We do a lousy job of helping them when they're going to fail, and we already know they are going to fail in their life. It doesn't matter how gifted and talented you are. Got a good friend of mine who had a son who was on the state championship football team. He was a star defensive back. He went to Texas A&M University. It was all academic, all accolades, everything you could imagine. They took him on the A&M campus, and his father looked at his son and he said, I want you to look around. Nobody cares what you did in high school. They don't know you, and they don't care. You're going to have to earn their respect. And I think he's right. We all fail. The question is, where did you fail? Who did you fail? In what way did you fail? And what can God teach you and help you in the reconstruction of your life and the restoration of your very soul? Because so many times we go back and look at the Bible and we think it's a pathway to success. It's also an incredible lesson on how to fail and how to lean upon God. Because God seems to be in the business of dealing with people who fail. Abraham lies twice. Jacob deceives his father and his brother out of their own inheritance. David sins with Bathsheba. The disciples all abandon Jesus at his crucifixion, and then they doubt the resurrection is real. Mark bails on the first missionary journey. Peter denies Jesus. Over and over again, these stories about people who with great expectations fail miserably when it comes to the task given to them. You go all the way back to Moses, and it is a story replete with one failure after another. Because Moses doesn't and isn't convinced that he has capability to do what God has called him to do. Lead my people out of slavery into the promised land. And he calls Moses. What is his response? Dear God, pick anybody but me, because he knows. And you go what Sharon just read, you just break it down. It's a series of excuses. One is, I'm not good enough. Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh, that I should bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? Second excuse, I don't have all the answers. Then Moses said to God, indeed, when I come to the children of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, what is his name? What shall I say to them? I don't know what to tell them. Third excuse, people are not going to believe me. And Moses answered and said, suppose they will not believe me or listen to my voice. Suppose they say the Lord has not appeared to you. And when that doesn't work, he goes to this. Oh God, I'm a terrible public speaker. Lord, I'm not eloquent, neither before you nor since you've spoken to your servant. I'm slow of speech and slow of tongue. The last one he comes to is, look, I'm not qualified. Don't ask me to do this. Oh, my Lord, please send the hand of whomever else you may send. What he's saying is, oh God, please, just anyone. But failure has a way of redefining us. And God uses our own failures. There's a great author named Michael Lewis. Some of you recognize the name. Wrote Liar's Poker and also Moneyball. Gifted writer. We got out of college. He followed the advice of his family and friends, and he became a Wall Street broker, but he was miserable at it. But he thought that's what he was supposed to do because everybody told him that was what he was supposed to do. And he had the chance as a stockbroker to write an op-ed for the paper. And he wrote for the paper an op-ed that basically said stockbrokers make way too much money and Wall Street is corrupt to its core. You imagine how that played with his employers who said, you're no longer a stockbroker. And when he found himself unemployed, what he looked up and found out was, you were never supposed to be a stockbroker, you're supposed to be a writer. And he said it liberated him and freed him, and it was the best thing that ever happened to him to lose his job. So the question is, where did you fail? So you look back over the course of your life and you look at specific things and incidences. And when you failed at something or you failed someone, even if it was yourself, it sent you in a different direction. Maybe it took a little while, but you found out ultimately where you were supposed to be and what you were meant to do. And maybe you thought at what you were supposed to be, but it revealed only, really, more importantly, what God wanted you to be. And maybe it was the failure in your life, as painful as it was or can be, it finally just broke everything open. You stopped living through other people's expectations, and you started living and leaning into God's real truth. Richard Rohr wrote a book called Falling Upward, and he said there's two stages of life, and if you're not there yet, you will be, and if you've been there, you know exactly what I'm talking about. First chapter, stage of life, you try to accumulate all that you can. You try to climb the ladder. You try to make a better career. You try to make more money, gain more material possessions, more power, more authority, whatever it might be. You're on the upward trend. And then there's a second half of life, and it's not marked by years. It's marked by an incident when you fail or it fails you. And you come to the realization that something is not right, that you cannot sustain this for the rest of your life. You don't want to because it's killing you inside. And after some great failure in your life, you begin to now live into the second chapter of your life, which is to give back, to be the person that God's called you to be, to live fully into what you were originally meant to be before you stopped thinking about what God created and started listening to other people. So J.R. Tolkien uses the term joyful catastrophe. I love that. And what he makes the argument is the cross is the greatest joyful catastrophe the world has ever known. Because you can't have the resurrection without the cross. You can't have eternal life without death. You can't have light without darkness. And so in the midst of it, it doesn't feel that way, but it's this joyful catastrophe. Thank God these are happening because it will finally lead me to the place I need to be. So remember the worst failure in your life. Make this personal. Don't just hear a sermon. Look at your life. Look back over the things that happened to you. And recall the moment when you found and discovered a God who was more real than you could ever imagine. Because in the midst of your failure, that's where God speaks to you. That's where God holds you. Maybe that's where you're finally able to listen to God. And you remember what you failed, how you failed, and who you failed. And you know the redemptive work of God to use broken people, who takes the worst things in your life and transforms them into the best things in your life, because everybody fails. One time or another, it's universal. Romans 3:23, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Go ahead and try to be perfect. It will not happen for you. And the moment you realize you can't is the moment your heart begins to open up. Second thing is failure is not final. God always has the last word. You think it's the end of the world. You think it's the end of everything you ever wanted. You can't see anything past that moment that hurts so bad and is so painful. And what God says is failure is not final. It's actually the gateway to the life you were supposed to have in the beginning anyway. The third is sometimes failure is what actually brings us to God. And it's hard to see it, it's hard to feel it, and even to know it when it's happening. Ann Dillard writes that one time she has a good friend of hers that just her life has fallen apart. She's got physical issues, health concerns. Her marriage is really in shambles. Her family is falling apart. She doesn't know what to do. Ann Dillard suggests that she go and spend some time at a convent. She's not an overtly religious person, but she just wants to get away, and it seems like the best option available. So she goes with the invitation of Ann Dillard to a convent just to spend some quiet time, reflect, and get her house and her life, as hopefully she can, back together again. She goes in to check in. Then she gets onto an elevator to go up to her room, and there is a nun who is there with her in the elevator who just walks up on her, has never met her, never talked to her. She looks at her and can see the pain and the uncertainty and the fear on her face. She looks down and sees the suitcase that she's holding, and she looks at the person and says, "God must love you very much." And she said it was the beginning of the change of her own life. You failed, I failed, we've all failed. The moment we fall short left us empty, hurting, and in pain, but we survived it. And the good news, it didn't kill us, because it can't and it won't, not with God's help. And we now look back in the midst of everything and we realize, in a way that's not trivial, it was a good thing that helped us finally get to the best things in our life, because it didn't destroy us, and we grew from it, we learned from it, and it changed us. So here's what I want you to know about Moses, and I want you to know about your life. Moses spends his first 40 years thinking he was somebody. He spends second 40 years learning he's an absolute nobody. And he spends the last third of 40 years of his life discovering what God can do with a nobody. Imagine what God can do with a nobody like you and me.